Hello, Stephen, and hello, everybody. I believe this is episode 5 between you and I. Is that right? We're going to talk about interpersonal effectiveness. So anyone who's watching at this point of the video, follow along with us. That's great. But also maybe go back and check episodes 1 through 4 because it leads us towards this. But Stephen, you've said before that there's not really a necessary process you must go through. These aren't steps 1, 2, 3, 4 that you must follow. What is, first of all, is what I'm saying true? And can you just explain to the listeners what exactly interpersonal effectiveness means?
Yeah, so the the not being steps that we have to follow is true in the original format, if you like, of dialectical behavior therapy. So in the original format of dialectical behavior therapy, it was designed to be basically a 12-month program that people could drop in at any point in time with 4 or 5 modules, depending on what you did with the self-assessment or self-analysis and mindfulness. I tend to lump them together. Some people separate them. If you lump them together, that's 4 modules. So people can drop in at any point in time because it's constantly rotating, and it's intended to be a skills educational program about these skills of DBT that fall into mindfulness and self-analysis, distress tolerance, so learning how to handle the distress that comes into our system, emotion regulation, where we're starting to work with the stories that are going underneath the surface, and then interpersonal effectiveness, where we're starting to create, maintain, or stop relationships that were either already in that are toxic, or so it's designed to build those interpersonal relationships with other people. However, that being said, the reason that there was no real starting point is because it rotated through twice. So, you went through the skills one time just to get familiarized with the language and the different skills that there are in each section. And then when you come around to them the second time, you've kind of got a better feel for what's going on in the program. And then you start to implement the ones that make sense for you, the ones that are effective for you to live the life you want to live and be the person you want to be. So there is kind of like a recommended way to do them. A lot of the training that I've had talks about this recommended way to do them. Starting with the self-awareness aspect of it. So self-analysis and mindfulness is intended to build self-awareness. So we want to start there, because if we're not aware of what's going on in our system, then we're not going to be able to recognize things when they're happening. We're not going to be able to change anything. So we build.
Sorry, Stephen, sorry to cut you off, but can I just throw something in that for my journey on
Yeah.
self-aware? I think the big thing for self-awareness and the rest of the tools for me was a word of accountability. If
Yeah.
I'm going into the other tools and everything I'm doing at this point is this person's doing this and I need to fix that person, that's, for me, it wasn't just being mindful and self-aware. It was about accountability, which is a big.
Yeah, I mean, so self-awareness is intended to build our understanding. I thought when I was coming into this type of work, I'm looking at 14 years now. I probably started doing dialectical behavior therapy about 12 years ago. Really kind of pushing into. Before that, I was doing a lot of cognitive therapy work. Then I discovered dialectical behavior therapy, and obviously when I was back in school, I really discovered it and all that sort of stuff, right? So. Self-awareness is intended, all the self-analysis and all the self-awareness stuff that we're trying to do is designed to help us to look inside, right? What is going on inside? What are my thoughts? What are my feelings? What things are happening? What stories am I telling myself about the situation? Because then that brings a level of, as you say, accountability. Doing this type of work is all about the accountability aspect of it. Like, I need to own my role in situations. I need to own the way that I'm looking at things. I need to recognize that it's not the situation that's activating me. It's my story about the situation that's activating me. And that means understanding what the story is. So self-awareness brings that accountability, because when we start to look at it from the perspective of, okay, I'm in control of what's happening in here. I can't control what's going on out there. To some degree we can, but not, the only thing we really got control over is us and what's going on inside of our system. And that, we need to be accountable for that. So the self-awareness aspect of it is, as you say, all about recognizing, first of all, we have to be willing to be accountable. Because, I don't know about yourself, but when I first started doing this type of work, First things first, it was everybody else's fault. I needed to, if everybody else started to look at the way the world that I looked at it, looked at the world, then everything would be fine. Stop pushing me to do things. If you look at it from this point of view, you'll understand where I'm coming from. If you start blaming me and start looking at yourselves, right? Not realizing that everybody else is looking at it from that perspective too. So the accountability piece is just kind of like turning that mirror back on me and recognizing that every single situation that I go into, I play a role in. I play a role in every single thing that I do, and it's my story about those situations, the things that whatever my internal narrative is the thing that's influencing my behavioral responses. So before I can start to recognize and not recognize, before I can start to change my perceptions, I've got to build self-awareness, and we do that through self-analysis and mindfulness, right? So then once we've started to get that self-awareness, one of the things that we're going to notice is, and one of the primary reasons that we're using mindfulness skills is to notice when we go into distress. So when we go into distress, which falls into fight, flight, freeze, submit, or distract, right? One of those, whichever kind of style of coping we're going into for that distress, we build awareness for that. And then we use the skills of distress tolerance to create new habits. So self-analysis and mindfulness builds awareness. Distress tolerance creates new habits, right? Because when we go into distress, our system goes into automatic behavioral responses that are just habitual. So no matter how much I know that this is not something that's helpful for me, no matter how much I know that, this story isn't true, as soon as I go into distress, then those behavioral responses just automatically kick in. So we have to create new habits. And how we do that is through practice, practice, practice. And when we think we've practiced enough, we practice some more. All of the skills that are involved in distress tolerance. So, practicing the stop skill, practicing the tip skill, skip skill, practicing the tip skill. Looking at our list of accepts, so all the things that we can do to distract and avoid in a healthy way, and then using those in conjunction with the improved skill to go through imagery work, looking at the meaning, practicing prayer and meditation if we need to, learning how to use positive affirmations and encourage ourselves to do more. So using improve and accepts together, practicing those throughout our day to build that muscle memory in. So when the shit does hit the fan and we go into distress, there's a higher probability that we're going to fall into those distress tolerance skills instead of the old ways of doing things. But without the practice, that's not going to happen. Then once we've got that down and we can understand how to handle the distress, like recognize the distress and handle it in a healthy way, we can really go to work on what those schemas, what those stories are that are underneath the surface. Because if we don't know how to handle the distress, as soon as we step into doing the emotion regulation work of working with the schemas and things that are underneath the surface, the shit hits the fan. And the distress gets really big and we'll go into those old behaviors, or we won't be able to work with the story because our system gets overloaded with fear, and we all know what happens when we get into that space. So there is a process that we're going through if we're doing it not on the cycle of the 12 months that it was originally designed to be done. And the reason that she originally designed it to do that, in my opinion, was just to get as many people through the program as possible and not having to keep starting the program from one particular point. If you're constantly rotating it, then it means that the program can keep going. It's also a really great way that you can, you take the skills in first of all, and then you start to implement them the second time around. And just all the research has just shown that when you use DBT skills training over a 12-month period, then the effectiveness of it is a lot higher. Once we've got all that stuff down, then we want to look at the types of relationships that we're in, because most of the time, again, if you're anything like me, I was either in relationships where I was, especially when I got into recovery, I was either in relationships where I was practicing self-sacrifice, so people pleasing, constantly trying to do what other people wanted me to do because I was afraid that they were going to reject me. Or I was in a space of dependence where I was feeling like everybody else was supposed to fix my problems and it was their fault and they needed to step up and do what I wanted them to do rather than them setting their own healthy boundaries. Or I was in a space of entitlement where it was, don't tell me what to do. This is what I want to do. I'm going to do what I want to do when I want to do it, and stop trying to push me around. That was my own experience of it, which generally meant that my relationships weren't very strong. So underneath it all was this underlying feeling of just loneliness, disconnection, sadness, the guilt and shame around what that meant, which is why we often talk about learning how to cope with those emotions, because generally speaking, it's those emotions that put us into a fear-based state in our system. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does make sense. And as you were speaking, the entitlement thing really resonated with me. Um, and maybe there's others to it, but that was the one that was like, yeah, bingo. Okay, when it comes to setting, I guess, boundaries with these types of relationships, because it makes sense what you're saying right now, and that's how could I possibly have a healthy form of communication with a person if I'm not in a state of baseline with myself? And it sounds like things like, excuse me, well, mindfulness, self-analysis, self-accountability are going to lead us to the ability to say, okay, my behavior is not your fault. So I'm going to work on how I'm responding to things. And then how I'm feeling is also not your fault. So I'm going to start working on how I'm reacting and feeling with things. And then when now I want to communicate this stuff to a person, and I know one of well, I shouldn't say one, there's many different tools and mnemonics that DBT offers when it comes to maybe giving people steps on how they could approach what may not be a healthy relationship in their life. And one of them that I'm aware of is Dear Man. So could you maybe explain to the listeners what that is and how it could be used?
Yeah, just to touch on something else that you said there. Another thing that's really important in DBT, obviously we're always trying to live the life we want to live and be the person we want to be in the areas of life that are important to us according to our true authentic values and beliefs. Um, and recognizing that emotions, when they're present in our system, just because I feel something doesn't mean that it's right. Right? Just because I feel offended, just because I feel guilty, just because I feel disrespected, just because I feel ashamed, doesn't mean that those particular emotions are accurate, because they're tied to the story that I'm telling myself about the situation. So if the story I'm telling myself about the situation is pretty much in line with what's actually happening, then the emotion is justified. But if the story I'm telling myself about the situation is out of line, and quite often what we tend to find is the story that we're telling ourselves about the situation is way out of line compared to what's actually happening. We've got judgments about other people, we've got filters for other people and situations, we've got filters for ourselves and situations. So when we're experiencing those emotions are valid because they're always valid because we're experiencing them. But they're not necessarily justified. It doesn't mean that it's accurate. So it's really important to look at it, because I think quite often, especially today, we get caught up on, well, I feel this, so it must be true. And that's not an accurate statement. Just because we feel something doesn't mean that it's true. It doesn't mean it's not true. It means that there's an opportunity for us, if that feeling is leaving us in a space that's not effective for us to live the life we want to live and be the person we want to be, then we need to take a look at the feeling to see how accurate it is. Right. So DBT works on that accountability that, when I'm feeling something, it's valid, but I need to figure out if the feeling and then the behavioral reaction is justified. Inside of our relationships, and this is where self-analysis is really important in interpersonal effectiveness. So for me, all of the interpersonal effectiveness skills are just not effective if you don't know the others. Right. So, we've got a number of different skills. Some of them use mnemonics to give us the steps to go through, or the things to remember. But if you can't handle the distress that's going on in, conversation and communication with other people, if you don't have the awareness for what your story is and what your filters are about those other people and about yourself in those situations, and if you haven't gone to work on your perceptions through the emotion regulation skills, when you step into those really important conversations with people where you're trying to achieve a particular objective inside of a relationship, then the shit just hits the fan. You get emotionally overwhelmed, you get angry, you disconnect, whatever your coping mechanism is when you go into that fight, flight, freeze, submit, or distract response. Okay. So it's super important to recognize, if I don't have the self-awareness, if I don't have the new habit, and if I haven't changed the perception, and I jump into trying to, build a new relationship or maintain a relationship that I've got going on, it can be really challenging. Doesn't mean you can't do it. It just means it can be really challenging because I just don't have the skills to create the type of relationship that I want to create. Okay. I just want to make sure that people are very aware of that because you used the mnemonic, or you referenced the mnemonic dear man. Now, this is something that I hear on a regular basis, and I used to use this, oh, and I need to practice dear man. When I think a lot of people, myself included, when I first started throwing it around in conversation, are just kind of using it as a way to say that they've done something. So in DBT, whenever we're looking at interpersonal effectiveness, the most important thing of any interpersonal effectiveness situation. So when we talk about interpersonal, it's a relationship with somebody else. If we're looking at our own internal thing, then it's intrapersonal, right? So interpersonal is a relationship with somebody external to us. So any conversation that we have with somebody else, any regular connection that we have with somebody else, whether it's the person you get your newspaper from, I don't know whether people still get newspapers, but the person that you get your gas from. There's a guy that I go to around here that pumps gas, and I like going to him because we just shoot the breeze in the mornings and just check in and see how things are going. I have an interpersonal relationship with that guy because we know each other. We know each other's names. I don't know his family or anything personal about him, but it's still an interpersonal relationship because we know each other, right? So interpersonal relationships have varying degrees of intimacy. And whatever interpersonal relationship we're going into, we need to know what our objective is in that relationship. And then we need to learn how to deliver on that objective. So whether it's I'm trying to build a new relationship and see how far I can take it, whether it's I'm trying to maintain an old relationship that I've got that I've recognized is healthy, and it's a relationship that I need to keep around because it's supporting me in living the life I want to live and being the person I want to be, or if it's eliminating or ending a toxic relationship that isn't supporting me in the life that I'm trying to live. I need to know what my objective is so that I can then structure the conversations that I'm having to meet that objective. Does that make sense?
Well, it makes sense. There's a part of me that remembers early in my recovery, I was seeking relationships for a lot of emotional validation that I didn't get. And as a result, my boundary, when you talk interpersonal, I would go from either you don't know me and now you know all of me. And
Yeah.
it was like, you talk about the objective. I wasn't analyzing my objective. I was just trying to wonder, is this someone that I can share myself with or not? I didn't have those degrees of guy at the gas station versus guy I've known for 15 years. It was just rigid. You either know me or you don't.
Yeah.
Um, and that takes skill set to analyze what you're describing, which is who is this person in my life? Is
Yeah.
this a friend? Is this a, like someone, even in friendship, what level
Yeah.
of friendship is this that I'm relying on? Like, is this someone that I would go to for money if I was in trouble? Is this somebody that I would invite over for a dinner during a family gathering?
Yeah.
Is this somebody that I'm going to call on their birthday to
Yeah.
check in with? Right, Stephen? Like this kind of analysis of the relationship.
And
Now,
also understanding what your expectations are.
right, what mine and maybe theirs are, because I
Yeah, what's
can't.
my expectation of them? What's my expectation of me inside of this relationship? And just recognizing that what other people's expectations might be. But that's how we figure out the whole what's my tribe aspect of things, right? We come back to when we're looking at expectations, we come back to values and beliefs. And we're going to talk a lot more about that when we start talking about setting boundaries later on. But yeah, like just knowing, much like yourself, I had very similar experiences in relationships. I would be guarded when I was, communicating with somebody, and then I'd see like an inclination or a possibility of, oh, this person might like me. I could have a friendship, or I could have a deeper relationship with this person. Then I'd absolutely slime them with all of my emotions and feelings and everything, and jump all over them. They'd set boundaries with me, and I'd go, well, fuck you then. I don't want anything to do with you. You don't love me. You don't like me. You don't care about me. I'm out of here. But that was all to do with my disorganized attachment style.
I get you. Let me ask you this then. Like, try to make it more about you. And if you could use the dear man, that would be great. If not, it's okay too. But can you
Yeah.
give an example with yourself then in your process where you've had to have a difficult conversation and how you did that, like how it went?
Yeah. So first, let's just touch on what Dear Man is, right? So
Okay.
Dear Man uses mnemonics to describe the steps that we go through when we're trying to structure a conversation. And the other thing just to keep in mind about, like any of the skills in DBT, first of all, it's going to feel really mechanical and clunky when we first start trying to use these skills. Okay, it's about taking the time to write things down, to practice having these conversations. So all of the skills in interpersonal effectiveness are basically designed to be used in conjunction with planning ahead to build mastery in the emotional regulation aspect of things. So in other words, we want to rehearse the skill, we want to go over it, we want to practice it, we want to practice having those conversations. Okay. And practice for the different emotional reactions we can have to different things that people can say, because planning ahead to build mastery is designed to build mastery not for the situation, but to build mastery for the emotional reaction we have in that situation.
Sorry to interrupt, but this may be a good place for some role play, because if we just read it to ourselves and we're like, this is how it's going to go, we don't give room for a response, then it's a curveball when it hits us, right?
Absolutely. You can role play. If you've got a really solid mindfulness practice, though, you can actually do that role playing in a mindful way. So what we call mindful exposure therapy, right? So imagining yourself in that situation and role playing it through in your mind. If you've listed the different outcomes, what's the worst case scenario, what's the best case scenario, what's somewhere in between, and you role play those scenarios in your mind, you actually don't need to do that role play with somebody else. You can do it mindfully, but it means having a solid mindfulness practice grounded in the skills of DBT, so that you can imagine yourself in those situations, connecting with your senses in those situations. So you're actually living the situation rather than just thinking about the situation, feeling the emotion as they're coming up and working through the different behavioral responses, the language that you're using in the conversation. And this is why, DBT skills are incredibly effective when used in a way where we're practicing them away from the distress, because that's what builds the new habit. So yeah, role playing does come into play. Sometimes it can be really helpful to do role playing with other people. It can also be really helpful just to do it from a mindful perspective, using imagery work to go through those role playing scenarios. Do you understand what I mean?
I do, and I want to emphasize what you said about the spectrum of worst, best, middle, because my story may take me to one of those polar sides and be like, I'm only going to think of this scenario because I know what this person's going to say when I say this. It's like, well, no, not necessarily. So if I'm going to do the role play on my own, I got to be really generous in understanding all the possibilities, not just what I know is going to happen when I say this to this person.
Yeah, and what you're planning for, like anytime we're doing planning ahead to build mastery, we're not necessarily planning for the situation. What we're planning for is our emotional reaction in the situation, right? So, if anger is the emotional reaction that I tend to respond with, I'm trying to build awareness for the anger getting activated in my system, not necessarily building awareness for what the other person is going to say. If, I back off from a situation, shut down and start people pleasing, that's a fear that comes into my system that activates that kind of behavioral response. Could be a fear that's coming into my system that activates that behavioral response. So I'm trying to build awareness for the emotion of fear, not necessarily what the other person is going to say to activate that feeling. It's just noticing the feeling so that I can now be accountable for how I feel and do the work around those particular emotions. So planning ahead to build mastery is all about, how am I going to feel if this happens? How am I going to feel if this happens? And how am I going to feel if this happens? So I can focus on the feeling, not the situation.
Yeah, and I get how we're not just doing a deer man to check off the list. This is a thing where, like you're saying, we're going to combine planning ahead to build mastery while we're doing this deer man exercise so that we know what our emotional experience is going to be when we enter this situation. And I guess we're not white knuckling it and then reacting as the different emotions do occur. So I can really appreciate where you're leading with this. Okay, so can you take us through then the letters and what they mean? Thank you.
So dear man itself, obviously DEARMAN. Okay, so and the intention of Dear Man is to create, especially the dear side of it, DEAR, is to create a basically a script. I'm hesitant to use those types of words because it can become a little bit too mechanical. But we want to create a script that we're going to then use to rehearse So we've got an idea of the direction. What's the objective in the conversation? And this is the direction I want the conversation to go. But then we use planning ahead to build mastery to kind of prepare for if it goes in different directions and how we keep it on course. So the D stands for describe. So I need to describe the situation that I'm stepping into, the situation, the objective in the conversation, or what the conversation is that I'm going to have from a non-judgmental and objective point of view. Okay, so I'm going to let the other person know what the purpose of this conversation is. Okay, so what's the intention? Then I'm going to express my thoughts and feelings. So the E stands for express. I'm going to express my thoughts and feelings about the situation that we're going to have. So maybe I'm concerned about the way the conversation is going to go. I'm worried about your reaction. Maybe I've got a particular point of view about this situation, and this is how it makes me feel. But I'm just going to express my thoughts and feelings about the situation that I just described. Then I'm going to assert, so the A stands for assert. Then I'm going to assert my wishes. So what is it that I want? What's the objective here? What is it that I'm trying to achieve? And I'm going to speak that into the situation. So, I'm letting the other person know that this is the situation we're talking about. This is how I think and what I feel about this is how I feel and what I think about this situation. And this is what I want. Okay, so describe, express, assert. And then the R stands for reinforce, which means I'm going to reinforce the other person with something that they're going to get out of this conversation. So how is it going to be effective for them to have this type of conversation and talk about things from this objective point of view so that we can come to a conclusion that's going to be helpful for both of us. Okay. Then the M stands for mindful. So I'm going to stay mindful of my objective. So the MAN is all about a way of being. Okay, so I'm just going to remember these things as I'm going through the dear aspect of the conversation. So the M is I'm going to remain mindful of what my objective is. So keep in mind what my objective is throughout the conversation. So as we're planning ahead to build mastery, something happens and it takes us off course. I'm going to recognize how that makes me feel. I'm going to validate that emotional experience and bring myself back into whatever the objective is. So I'm going to stay mindful for what the objective is. I'm also gonna make sure that because I'm practicing this and I'm rehearsing over and over again using the planning ahead to build mastery approach, I'm gonna appear confident in what it is that I'm saying. So the A stands for appear confident, right? Because the last thing I want to do when I'm having a conversation with you is going, so Aaron, this is what I was thinking, and I was hoping that because you're just going to be looking at me when I'm having that conversation, like, what the hell? This guy doesn't, know what he wants. He's being really kind of dodgy the way he's communicating to me, and it's just not going to be effective in the long run. So I'm going to appear confident in the way that I'm expressing myself, in the thing that I'm asking for. I'm going to make sure that that confidence is conveyed in the way that I'm communicating. And then the N in the man aspect of it stands for negotiation. So basically what that means is just be willing to negotiate. In other words, it's not always about this is what I want, this is how it is, you have to see it from my point of view. This is what I want, and I'm going to be willing to negotiate around how that looks because I recognize that any healthy relationship is a reciprocating relationship, right? It's not all one-way traffic. It's not all my way or the highway. Any healthy relationship has a level of negotiation, and some people might call that compromise to the outcome of any conversation. So describe, express, assert, reinforce, stay mindful, appear confident, and be willing to negotiate. That's the kind of textbook example of Dear Man. Does that make sense?
It makes sense and it sounds easy, but I know it's not because I'm just like as you're thinking of it, I could think of that M is difficult, man.
Yeah,
That we started here and now we're all the way over here. Let's bring
yeah.
it back. How do we maintain control of a
But
conversation when
why is that difficult? Why is that staying mindful of the objective
I
difficult?
guess I'll give you an example for me is a person tries rather than focusing on what I'm talking about, they throw back to me, well, you always, like, and it's like, okay, so now we're talking about something I've done rather than what I've brought into the discussion. And
Yeah.
now
So
it's like,
what
now
happens when that person says that to you?
I begin defending. I begin
Why?
defend, um, because I don't agree with the attack, I guess,
So
is
what's
what it is.
happening in your system?
Anger, yeah, I would say anger is the first thing I resonate with when I'm hypothetically going through this.
Yeah, 100%.
Um,
So what's happening in your system is that you're going into a fight mode,
right. Yeah.
right? So in other words, your system's gone into distress. And when your system goes into distress, you're going to go fight, flight, freeze, submit, distract. How are you going to deal with that? And for you, what you're describing there is now I'm in a fear-based state because you're challenging the way that I feel or what it is that I'm trying to achieve. So I'm going into overcompensation or fight to try to deal with this situation. So basically what you're recognizing is that your system goes into distress. And when your system goes into distress, we go into automatic behavioral responses if we haven't done the work of building awareness, practicing distress tolerance, going to work on those underlying stories. And even when we have done that work, we can still go into distress that overwhelms our system. I'll give you an example of that in a minute, of how it worked for me and what I had to do using the Dear Man skill to kind of reconcile the particular situation, right? So what you're describing, Aaron, is what everybody who has those big emotional experiences goes through. When we try to have a conversation with somebody about our objectives, they don't agree with us 100%. It sends our system into a fear-based state because there's something going on that we don't know how to handle and we haven't recognized it. And then the automatic behavioral response takes us away from that original objective. And then we sit there afterwards going, what the fuck just happened? Why
Yeah.
did I do that?
Well, let's give a simple example, Stephen. Just a simple. I noticed my significant other hasn't been taking out the garbage like they said they would. So I decide to say that this is something I've noticed that is upsetting me, and I'd like to know if you're able to do it or not, because if not, I'd be willing to take a. But before I can get those words out, it's yeah, and you're never turning the water off in the bathroom. I've asked you, and you leave your towels on the floor. You da 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 da, and it's like, yeah, okay. Can we talk about that afterwards? I went, no, and it's like, what the hell? I can't, and it's difficult, I guess, and it's like you say, it's not mechanic, it's not people don't react the way I think they should. And when they
Exactly.
don't, like you say, I go into this isn't how it was supposed to happen.
Yeah. So again, we go back to your expectation. I
Yeah.
expect that you are going to react this way. And when you don't, there is an automatic behavioral response, right? Those expectations, there's nothing wrong with expectations. It's what it means when they're not met.
Mhm.
Right. So if I expect that you're going to agree with me on this, and I'm going into this conversation with the expectation that you agree with me, and I've got a story, so I've got an unrelenting standard around that particular agreement that you have to agree with me. And if you don't, that means XYZ, then I'm going to go into emotions like guilt and shame and fear that come into my system just by having a conversation about, to use your example, taking the garbage out or whatever it is that we're going to do, right? That when somebody comes back and says, well, you didn't do this and you didn't do that, there's a fear of guilt and shame that comes into our system. We go into that overcompensation, that whatever it is that happens in our behavioral responses, and it takes us away from achieving the main objective because the emotion gets in the way.
Well, here's the thing. I get what you're saying, Stephen, and this is why the work is so important, and finding our tribe is also so important, because
Yes.
if we find that we're having these types of disagreements, yet the person we're discussing it with is having the response that you're describing, which is they can't even address the issue because every time it's brought up, they go into a state of guilt or
Yeah.
shame,
Able,
and we
capable,
can't
willing.
communicate. It's like, well, then maybe we need to evaluate if you and I are even in the same tribe,
Yeah.
because
Able, capable, and willing.
there we go. What do you mean by that exactly, Steve?
So when we put an expectation on somebody to be something inside of our support network, right? So when we're talking about interpersonal effectiveness, we need to know what the support network looks like, and we need to know what our expectations are on other people. And this takes a lot of self-honesty, eh? Like really having the ability to sit back and be honest about what your expectations are on other people, and on yourself as well. Then once we know what those expectations are, we can take a step back from them and start asking the question around whether these expectations and the standards that we're setting for other people are realistic. And how we know whether they're realistic is whether the person is able, capable, or willing to meet the expectation. Now, I just did a video on this recently, where what I was trying to say about able, capable, and willing is that in new relationships, when we're trying to build new relationships, that can be a little bit tricky because there's no history. How do we know whether somebody is able, capable, and willing to meet the expectation? We communicate what the expectation is and then observe what they do. Right. So, in a brand new relationship, let's say I didn't know you and we were just getting to know each other, going for coffee and stuff. I'm gonna, maybe test the waters with certain things to see what the trust level's like. I'm gonna open up slowly and we'll talk about boundaries in a bit, having boundaries with myself, to build that relationship and observe the way that you're responding to see if you're able, capable, and willing to meet the expectation I've got inside of this relationship. Okay. In older relationships, so relationships that are already there, this is simply about looking, it's really quite simple. It's about what's the evidence? What's the history? So when I've tried to have these conversations with you, what's my expectation? Let's say my expectation is that when I need support, Erin is going to be there as soon as I shoot Erin. And this is where honesty really has to come in, right? As soon as I need Erin to be there to have a supportive conversation, he's going to be there. That's what my expectation is, right? And people say that that's not what their expectation is sometimes in relationships. Then why does it bother you so much when you reach out to somebody and they're not there, right? So first of all, we need to look at whether that that expectation is realistic, right? Is it an unrelenting standard? So there's a lot of different work that we need to do around those expectations that revolves around the schema of unrelenting standards and things like that. But at the same time, you know, if my expectation is that you're going to be there, what's the history tell me? If I ask you to do something and you're never there, you never support me because, and I'm being very literal with the black and white word never. You know, every single time I reach out to you, you're not there, or every single time I reach out to you, you come back with an attack on me. So I've got people that I know, that I work with, and that I know personally, that have a belief that their family is supposed to support them a certain way. And then when they reach out to their family to support them that way, their family doesn't support them that way. They support them in a way that the only way that they're able, capable, and willing to do, which then pisses off that person. And they get all mad and it spirals into a fight, flight, freeze, submit, distract kind of scenario. They back off from it and then they go back with the same expectation. Well, my family's going to support me with everything that I need. But they've never demonstrated either an ability. So do they have the time to support you the way that you want them to? Do they have the space in their schedule to be there when you need them to be there? Are they capable? Do they have the skills to do what it is that you're asking them to do? Are they trying to learn the skills? Are they going to work on themselves to know how to support you? And are they actually willing to support you the way that you want them to? If they keep demonstrating that they're not able, capable, and willing, then we have to come back to accountability, which is why do I keep asking the person to do something that they've never demonstrated an ability, a capability, or a willingness to do? Why? Why do I keep doing that? Right. And then that's a self-exploration journey. Okay. So does that make
Oh,
sense when we
100%,
talk
dude.
about
Yeah,
tribe?
yeah. I think that was great. Very well put. Um,
The interpersonal effectiveness is all about finding your tribe, basically, which we all innately need to belong to a tribe of some sort. We need to feel like we fit in. We need to feel like we're a part of something. The old
well,
expression.
sorry to cut you off, but family's got to be the toughest one because we all think that our family should be our tribe.
Well, I
And
mean, they can
sometimes
be
it's
your
not.
tribe, but they might not necessarily be. Remembering that tribes. So that what I was going to say was the expression that comes up quite a lot is that it takes a village, right? I don't know if you've ever heard that expression. It's one that
Yeah.
gets thrown a lot. It takes a village to raise a child. What that is basically saying is that we need to find a tribe, and inside of this tribe, inside of this village, whichever way you want to put it, there are ever decreasing circles of support, right? So on the outside, you've got people like the guy at the gas station that I shoot the breeze with every now and again, right? He's on the outside of my support network because he's somebody that I shoot the breeze with, lightens my day when I have a chat with him. But I'm not going to open up and have intimate conversations with him about what's happening in my life because I don't know him. I say morning. I'm not going to use his name on here. I say morning, bud. What's going on? How's things going? How's work? What's happening for you? And he says, oh, how's the kids? Because he sees me driving with the kids sometimes, taking them to school. Stuff like that. Have a great day. See you later. Kind of lightens my day. He's a part of my support network, part of my tribe, part of my village, but he's on the outside circles of that network. And then as you come in, you get different degrees of boundary setting with people where you start to open up more and more and more in your relationships. Family are somewhere in there, 100%, if family is available to you, right? Sometimes family are just not an option for people. And, that's something that we have to address if that's the case. But that this tribe that we're trying to create is what we mean when we talk about support network. So inside of that tribe, inside of that support network, and this is what is interpersonal effectiveness, is really understanding what this means. You know, inside of my tribe, I am going to have people that are specifically in that network of people that are designed to support me with living the life I want to live and being the person I want to be when it comes to recovery. But not everybody in my tribe is going to be recovery oriented. If all I do is talk about recovery with people all the time, over and over again, inside of that interpersonal network that I've got, I'm going to burn out on recovery. Sooner or later, my system's just going to go, fuck it, I don't want to do this anymore.
Also with the people around you.
Yeah, they're going to get bored of it.
Yeah.
Right? You know,
I
let's talk
would
about
at
other
least, I'll
things.
say.
What's that?
I said, I know I would. I'm not going
Yeah,
to speak
no, I
for
get it.
others, but
Yeah.
I would.
If I'm coming to you constantly talking about the same thing over and over and over again, sooner or later you're going to say, okay, let's have a conversation about this. Or you're going to start to put up boundaries, unless that is your role inside of the community and that's been set up previously. So I've got people in my life that I've set those kind of relationships up with. Right. So, but building this understanding of the network is super, super important. And then having those conversations that revolve around using that dear man approach to set the objective inside of the conversation. Okay. So, you know, I'll give you a couple of examples that I've had to do, right? So using the dear man, and one that went really well, and then I'll talk about one where I was something didn't go well because I didn't use the dear man, and then how I had to use the dear man to come back and kind of not fix, but deal with the situation. So I got a really good friend of mine that is part of my support network, and the reason that he's a part of my support network is because of the way that I set up that relationship. Okay, and I use the dear man to set up that relationship. So you know, I said to him, let's just call him Dave, just for argument's sake. Okay, so I described the situation, and so I realized that I wanted to have this person as a part of my part of my support network, a specific part of my support network that I could talk about recovery with. So I used the dear man. First of all, I sat down and I figured out, how do I want to have this conversation? And I started to write out what I wanted to say. And then I used planning ahead to build mastery to, you know, if I ask him these questions and he says, fuck you, buddy, I don't want anything to do with you. How am I going to feel about that? How am I going to react to that? Because that's the worst case scenario. Best case scenario is where he says, oh, that's amazing. I can't wait. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to building this relationship. So how am I going to feel about that? And what am I going to say? And what's middle of the road where he says, yeah, definitely willing to support you, but I need to, you know, just be clear that I'm not available 24/7. You know, I've got my own life going on. So if I am available, I'll be there for you, which is kind of more of a middle of the road response. So that's how I use planning ahead to build mastery for having this conversation. So my objective going into having the conversation was to say to him, I want you to be a part of my support network and be there for me when you're available if I need you. That's basically the objective that I had. Okay. So I described that. I said, listen, Dave, I want to have a conversation with you about my recovery and about the support network that I'm trying to build. And I'm just wondering if you're willing to have that conversation. Describe the situation. Okay. He said, yes. So I said, okay, so now I'm going to express my thoughts and feelings. So I think that, you know, you and I have got a really good friendship going on. I've known you for a little bit of time now. And I feel really comfortable with you. I feel relaxed when I'm having conversations, feel like I can open up and talk to you about these things. You know, I know that my support network is kind of lacking. So I'm just expressing what I'm feeling and what I'm thinking. Okay. Then I'm going to assert what my wishes are. So what I said to him then into the next sentence was, and what I'd really like is for you to be a part of my support network so that when I do need to have these types of conversation, you know, you're available for me to reach out to, that I can, you know, set these conversations up and reach out to you and have a feeling and an understanding and a belief that you'll be there when you're available to have these types of conversation. So I'm asserting what I want. Okay. Then I'm going to reinforce what the other person's going to get out of it. And at the same time, I also want to let you know that if ever you need to have those types of conversation, I'm going to be there for you because I believe in building these relationships being a reciprocating thing. So it goes both ways. And, you know, I think that would be really beneficial for you and your support network just as much as it would be for me and my support network. What do you say? So that's a dear script, staying mindful of my objective, which is to ask him to be a part of my support network, appearing confident in the way that I'm saying things, and being willing to negotiate at the end with the what do you say, right? As it was, that conversation went really well. The guy said, "Yeah, absolutely." He said to me, I'll be there when I can, and we can build this relationship, and it's a relationship that I've still got in my life now. Does that make sense? Can't hear you, man. You're muted.
So I muted myself because I got dogs in the background going a
No
little
worries.
loud. But it makes sense, and what I like there was that you described it in a way that I understand now, that man is really working through the deer.
Yes.
So while we're going through the deer, we're staying mindful of the man.
Yes.
And I can imagine how myself, where I'd be like, Dave, I've really been getting along with you a lot. Like when we went to the ball game last week, that was awesome, wasn't it? And then now we're going to go into like a two, and then, oh shoot, why did I call you here, Dave?
Yeah,
And
you've taken yourself off topic in that. And that's the importance of the script and practice, right?
it is, and remembering that M, how
Yeah.
important that M is while we're going through the deer. And okay, so you said that that's an example where it worked,
Yeah.
but there's one that you said where you kind of fumbled the ball and had to go back.
Yeah. So for me, Dear Man generally works. I'll be honest with you. Whenever I rehearse it and I practice it and I use it, it generally works. I might not always achieve the outcome or the objective that I'm trying to achieve, but the conversation generally goes really well. Right, when I follow that particular kind of format inside of my conversations. And you can use multiple dear approaches inside of one conversation. So I might start the conversation that way, expressing what it is that I want, and then go back into the D, so describing the next situation, expressing my thoughts and feelings, asserting what I want, reinforcing the other person, right, and constantly going through that particular format inside of the conversation. When I don't use it and I jump into situations, generally speaking, I get overwhelmed with emotion and the shit hits the fan. So, I've had situations, and I can think of a number of them, where I want to tell somebody what I want them to do. So my objective is that I want them to do something. Okay, I want them to deal with something a certain way. I want them to handle a situation a certain way. I want them to be a certain person. Okay. So my objective in that is I want you to do something. And there's nothing wrong with having an objective like that. It's just knowing how to formulate the conversation. So if I don't formulate the conversation following that kind of dear approach and inserting the man as I'm going through it, I get emotionally overwhelmed. And I might go into the situation saying, for example, I've gone into situations where I want somebody to see something from my point of view. Right. So I'll go in and say, listen, I need to, I might start off with, listen, I want to talk to you about this because it's really starting to piss me off right now that you're doing this, and the fact that you're seeing it from this point of view just isn't fucking right. So basically all I'm doing is I'm just throwing blame on the other person, right? I'm not being accountable for what it is that I'm feeling or thinking. I'm not expressing my thoughts and feelings. I'm not asserting my wishes. I'm not reinforcing the other person. I've just jumped straight into, I don't like what you're doing. You need to fucking change this shit because it's pissing me off. And if you don't change this shit, something bad is going to happen.
How many parents out there are hearing themselves right now, or their own parents, right? Like, turn that shit down, or I'm gonna kick. But sorry,
So
Stephen, go
generally
on.
what happens when I do that is that the other person now gets defensive because I'm blaming them. So they've gone into, and I'm usually coming at it quite aggressively. So that my aggression activates their defense mechanism. So they go into fight, flight, freeze, submit, or distract. And if theirs is confrontation, they're going to push back. Even if theirs is submit and they give in to what it is that I'm saying, they're actually not learning anything from the situation because they're in a fear-based state. So they're not going to remember that the next time. They're just going to go through the same old behavioral response because they're filled with fear and anxiety about the situation. So they're just using their own defense mechanism. So what we want to do is, so then at the end of those conversations, then it usually ends in confrontation. The other person's like, fuck you, asshole. I don't want, who are you to tell me what to do? I'm not going to do the thing that you're asking me to do. I'm going to keep doing what I want to do. And I go, oh yeah, well, okay, here we go. And then it just keeps escalating and escalating. And, that's because of the lack of validation and the lack of going through the process of having healthy conversations, right? So, what I've had to do then is, after the fact, once those things have played out the way that they did, is then use the dear script to go back and be accountable. This is a really hard thing to do because there's all the guilt and shame, there's all the fear about what the other person's going to say. But using the Dear script has immensely helped me with my accountability. Okay, so the other day I went running outside because there was a guy doing some work in the street, and I thought he'd done something to my house, and he hadn't. But I went running outside going, "Hey buddy, did you do this cable up here and put it here?" And he went like, "What the fuck are you talking about?" And started pushing back on me. We ended up in a bit of an altercation, not physically, just like going back and forth, like, this needs to get fixed. And he's like, "It's nothing to do with me." And I'm like, "Well, I need to know who it is," because I'm all emotional, right? So I walked off. I realized in the moment that I was in distress, like, and this is the work, right? I realized in the moment pretty quickly that I was in a state of distress. So I stopped, turned around and walked back in the house. When I walked back in the house, I took some big, deep breaths, and I was just observing what was going on in my system, just recognizing there was a part of me that was angry and upset because somebody'd run this cable across the front of the house and not done it properly, and this was disgusting and it was disrespectful to me. And I saw this person outside as a workman and thought that he was the one that was doing the work. As it turns out, he's not. He's a plumber. So he's there doing the drains, right? But my aggression in the conversation, because I didn't go out there and have a conversation from a respectful point of view, and we're going to talk about give and fast in a second, because I didn't go out and talk about things from that respectful point of view, it escalated because there's no emotional validation. And when your emotions aren't validated, the escalation of that emotion ramps up the communication. And I ended up in a pretty heated conversation with this guy. It wasn't like ramping up into a physical thing. And I think purely and simply because I stopped, recognized it, and walked away. I'm not a physical kind of person anyway, but my language can get a lot stronger than it did. Stopped and walked away. And when I was inside, I recognized, man, I was out of order there. That was completely my fault. I went out there like ramped up because I'd seen something, thought it was this guy. That was all my fault. I need to figure this out. I need to go out because it's not who I want to be. So in order for me to deal with my guilt and shame in this situation, because there was a part of me that felt guilty for what I did, and rightly so, and there was a part of me that felt shame, maybe not so justified because it doesn't make me a bad person, but I want to be accountable for the way that I reacted, so that I can deal with that guilt and shame. And like I said, it's a really hard thing to do. So basically what I did is I took some deep breaths. I formulated what it was that I wanted to say. I didn't actually write it down, but I actually ran through it in my head as to how I wanted to say it and what I wanted to say. I let the situation calm down a little bit. I think I took the kids to school and then came back. And when I came back, the guy was outside again. So I just wandered over and I said, "Hey man, can I have a conversation with you about what just happened?" So I'm describing the situation. He said, "Sure." And you could see he was defensive, like right away, right? Because he thinks I'm going to jump down his throat again. And I said, listen, I'm not justifying it, but I was really upset about this cable. And I thought that it was you that had put the cable in. And I was feeling like really angry about the way that it had been done. And that's just not who I want to be, the way that I express myself. Right. So I expressed my thoughts and feelings. I asserted my wishes. I said, "I really want to apologize to you because that's not fair the way that I spoke to you. You had absolutely nothing to do with that. I didn't realize that at the time, and I came out gung ho on you. But I just want to really sincerely apologize for the way that I behaved." And he went, "Okay, man." I said, hopefully we can go, and this was my version of reinforce. Hopefully this isn't going to ruin both of our days, and we can just, let bygones be bygones. I put my hand out to shake his hand. And again, I just really apologize because the last thing I want to do is screw your day up by being an arsehole and accusing you of something that you didn't want to do, that you didn't actually do. And he was like, "No, man, no worries," shook my hand, laughed. And then like later on in the day, I saw him and he waved at me and everything. So I'm assuming that it was okay. But the
Either
reason
that
that
or
I,
as a plumber, he might have just grabbed a shitty pipe and shook your hand. That's
yeah, maybe, but I'm not doing that for him. This is the thing
this
about,
is a
right? This is the most important thing to understand about when we're, making amends or having these types of conversation. I'm not having that conversation for him. I'm having that conversation for me. because I need to get my values and beliefs back on track. So I don't experience the guilt and shame of beating myself up, or I don't sit in the thought rumination. So the accountability of recognizing what happened, it takes me away from the thought rumination of, oh, that guy's an arsehole, right? That lacks accountability. We're not having those conversations with other people for them. We're having those conversations with other people for ourselves. Because this is about living the life I want to live and being the person I want to be. And if I'm not being the person I want to be, then I'm going to be filled with guilt and shame. So when I get that guilt and shame come up, if it's justified, which it totally was, because of the way I behaved was not in line with my values and beliefs, that's a justified emotion of guilt for sure. I need to deal with that. How I deal with that is by getting my values and beliefs back online by having that type of conversation. I can give you numerous examples in my life where having that type of conversation would have been massively beneficial to me, regardless of what the other person's reaction was in those situations. Regardless, if the other person says, "Fuck you, buddy, I don't want anything to do with you, you're an arsehole," I've done what I needed to do. If you're holding on to some kind of resentment, I can't do anything about that. Right? I'm going to be accountable. I'm going to own what I did and put it out there. And if you're upset about that, okay, I get it. I'm here if you ever want to have that conversation to deal with that. If you've got something else that you want to say, but I'm having those conversations for me, not for you. I'm not going to say that to the person.
No, I get you, and I can appreciate, because also when you were saying like I need to do this, not because it's what needs to be done, but it's because who I am and who I
Who I
want to
am.
be.
Yeah.
I can appreciate that. There's no right or wrong way
No.
to approach that scenario.
And that brings us to give and fast, right?
Yeah.
Because give and fast are mnemonics that we have in DBT that are all about respecting other people and respecting ourselves. Okay, so inside of the way that we're interacting with other people, give stands for be gentle. So that means basically don't be abrasive and aggressive to other people when you're speaking to them. Don't attack them. Just understand where you're coming from. Just be gentle in the way that you're having these types of conversation. Okay. I stands for be interested. So being interested in the other person's point of view, being interested in where they're coming from, being interested in their emotional experience, how they're feeling about what you're talking about. V stands for validate, because validation is everything. Right? We always want to validate the other person's opinion, the other person's emotion, the other person where they're coming from, their perspective. And then the E stands for maintain an easy manner. So notice your tone when you're speaking. Right? If you're talking down to somebody, that manner that you're putting out there can be seen as being quite aggressive. And that's the last thing we want to do. And this is about respecting the other person. Then the respect for ourselves falls into the fast aspect of things, which the F stands for be fair. So be fair to yourself and your own point of view and what it is that you want. Make sure you're being fair to your own needs, the things that you want inside of this conversation, and not just people pleasing, falling into what they want. The A stands for apologies. And a lot of people, when they see this, think it means no apologies. I've actually heard people say, well, DBT taught me never to apologize, so I'm not saying sorry. No, that's not what it means. Like, seriously, that is not what it means. It basically means don't over apologize. So don't take responsibility for things that are not your responsibility. In other words, I'm not responsible for you and fixing your emotional experience. So if I'm in a conversation with somebody and this person is all upset, I'm going to be accountable for the role that I played, but I'm not responsible for fixing your emotion for the rest of my life. Do you know what I mean? I'm not jumping in to say, oh, what can I do to fix your emotion? That's too much apologizing. It's too much
This is a weird place to
responsibility.
be.
Yeah,
Sorry,
it
Steve. It's
really
just
is, right?
because we can get rigid with that and go,
Yeah.
well, it's not my fault that you feel that way.
Yes. Yeah. No, we don't want to fall into that because now we're not validating, we're not having that easy manner. So we go back to give, right? So this is why this is a dialectical thing. We're going back and forth. Relationships that are healthy are reciprocating. We're communicating through the dear man aspect, and we're using give and fast to create that reciprocating environment, right? Because healthy relationships are reciprocating relationships. It's super important that we remember that. They're not all one-way traffic. So it's not all about me and it's not all about you. They go back and forth. So the A is don't over apologize. The S is stick to your values. So going back to the tribal aspect of things, the building your support network and living the life you want to live and being the person you want to be, all revolves around values and beliefs. So know what areas of life are important to you, know what your values and beliefs look like in those areas of life, and make sure that you maintain those values and beliefs and stay true to them. And the T is be truthful. Okay, so just, don't bullshit, don't lie. I was somebody when I was living the addictive lifestyle that lost track of the amount of lies that I was telling. So I would go into conversations with people thinking, fuck, what did I tell this person before? Trying to remember what I'd said, so I'm not being truthful in any way at all. So give is about respect for others. Fast is about respect for self. And the thing about using give and fast is that they're ways of being, right? So I'm gonna kind of fluctuate back and forth between give and fast, maintaining respect for others and maintaining respect for myself inside of the conversations, using that dear and man approach in the way that I'm communicating. And I just want to be clear, like I said in the beginning, it sounds really easy, but when we first start doing it, it's not easy and it is incredibly clunky and mechanical. But the more we practice it, the more organic it becomes.
Okay, and if I can use it one word to simplify everything that you just described, I would say remain positive in the
Yeah,
discussion.
positive communication. Yeah.
Okay, so why is it my responsibility to be the positive person in this communication? Why is it so important, I guess, that I remain positive through this process?
Well, it's not about you maintaining positivity. I think quite often people think that positive communication means that you've always got to have a positive point of view. Positive communication just means basically following that deer approach where you know what your objective is and you're sticking to to what the objective is, maintaining an outlook that isn't filled with blame for others. Positive communication is all about owning what it is that you feel, what it is that you want. So it falls into that kind of deer approach, and not getting into the negative space of blaming other people. And the reason why that's my responsibility is because that's who I want to be. That's the life I want to live. Right. And I can sit in a space of blaming other people for my emotional state, but it's just not effective. It's just not effective for me to live the life I want to live and be the person I want to be. When I take accountability and I'm the one that is communicating from that, I'm not being aggressive. I was one of the kings of passive aggressive communication and sarcasm before I started doing this work, because I was just kind of raised in an environment that's the primary way that we used to communicate. I'm from England, so yeah. Sorry, I don't want to knock English people or anything.
No, but the thing is, sorry, but I want to ask that facetious question. How's that working for you? But
It doesn't.
It's like, but did it? Because,
No.
well, I would think if you were to say a bunch of sarcastic stuff that would be in a way to push me away, it would work on pushing me away. But I'd
Yeah,
also
but
have
is that who I want to be, and is that what I really want?
So this is the interesting thing about it is
Yeah.
when we talk about efficacy, we're talking about, once again, to be the person we want to be inside the relationships that are most important to
In
us,
the areas of life that are important to us. Yeah.
right? So what is then when we talk about boundary setting here?
Yeah.
Because passive aggressiveness can work, right? Like that's
Yeah.
why
So can
people do it,
aggressiveness in the
right?
short term.
This is the issue. Okay, so how do we evaluate if how we're setting? Because I love everything coming together here. Dear man being used in a way by applying give and fast and recognizing that a boundary isn't rigidly set in place, black, white, we put it there. We've got to remember how we're putting it there. So how do we evaluate if what we're doing when setting a boundary is following this skill set?
Yeah. So boundary setting, the thing to understand about boundaries, and there's a couple of different things that I want to say about setting boundaries. The thing to understand about boundary setting is it's got very little to do with the other person. It's got everything to do with, let's say I'm setting a boundary, right? So I'm going to talk about it in terms of me. But if you were talking about this, you'd be talking about it in terms of you. So um, if I'm setting a boundary with somebody, it's everything to do with me and my values and beliefs, and very little to do with the other person and anything to do with them. It's got a lot to do with their behavior and the way that they're behaving in the environment, because they are crossing one of my boundaries. In other words, they're doing something that's compromising my values and beliefs. So boundaries are all about values and beliefs, in my opinion. So living the life I want to live, being the person I want to be in the areas of life that are important to me according to my true, authentic values and beliefs. That's kind of like the overarching theme that we've got for doing this type of work. So values and beliefs underpin everything. They are, it is super important that we know what our values and beliefs are, what it means to be the person that we want to be, what expectations we have on other people when we're building this support network and creating the tribe and the village around us. Whether those expectations are realistic, because that is how we set boundaries. So inside of the relationship, if I have a boundary around honesty, let's say, right? Because I believe in a relationship that I should be honest with you, unless it's going to compromise the safety of me or somebody that I care about. And in a reciprocating relationship, that standard also applies to you. I believe that you should be honest with me, unless it's going to compromise the safety of yourself or somebody else that you care about. Right? Let's just put that out there as being the belief around honesty in this type of relationship. And then you start telling lies to me. And I know that you're telling lies. Even if I just think that you're telling lies to me, I can now have a conversation using dear to establish what's going on. Right? So, hey, I just want to talk to you about this. I'm just going to make this up. Hey, I want to talk to you about the situation, Aaron, where the conversation that we had yesterday. Because I'm going to be honest with you, there's a part of me that feels like, it wasn't exactly truthful the way that went. I could be wrong. I'm not saying that it is. I'm just, when there's a part of me that feels that way, I think it's just important to address it, because assert my wishes, because it's really not cool with me when people are being dishonest and they lack truthfulness, because for me, that's a really important value. And I believe that we should be honest with each other wherever it's possible. And I think for you inside of this relationship, in order for us to keep building this relationship moving forward, that would be something that would be helpful for you too. So can we have a conversation about whether that was truthful or not? I don't know, I just kind of used the dear expression and followed the man kind of guidelines to pretend having a conversation with you about that. Right. But that's how that's my initial step of setting a boundary. I'm highlighting the fact that I feel like there was something that happened here, and I'm setting a boundary with you around how that's not good. Okay. So now if I find out later on that that's happening again, I'm going to step that up. So I'm now maybe going to go into if then statements, but I'm still using it inside of the dear man philosophy, right? So, hey, Aaron, I just want to have a conversation with you. I know we've talked about this a couple of times before, but it seems like it keeps coming up. And, I know we established before that there was a little bit of dishonesty that was going on and we were going to work on that, but it seems to keep happening again. And I feel like it's really important for us to have a conversation about that. And if it continues to go that way, then I'm going to have to think about, the kind of level of connection we have in this relationship. So, for you, I think that this relationship's just as important to you as it is for me. So, if we want to continue this relationship, then I think it's really a really good idea for us to have a conversation about this. What do you say? Again, just kind of pulling that one out of my rear end. It's not something that I've rehearsed or anything with you. But just using that dear thing to step up the boundary, right? If then. Now, if the boundary gets crossed, I kind of work on a 3-strike rule. I don't know. Some people do 5 or 6 strikes, but I tend to work on a 3-strike rule. That if it then comes up again, now I'm going to say, okay, this boundary's been crossed. And now I'm going to change the relationship dynamic by setting a boundary with myself. When I'm changing the relationship dynamic, I'm not necessarily setting a boundary with you. I'm setting a boundary with the part of me that wants to interact in this relationship in a certain way that is creating the dynamic that is crossing compromising my values and beliefs. Do you understand what I mean?
I do. Yeah. So in this situation, you might say we can still have a relationship, but
Yeah,
there's a
I'm
part
not
of me that,
kicking you out, but I'm setting a boundary with the part of me that wants to share certain things with you. I am no longer going to share those certain things with you because it's not being reciprocated and the relationship isn't where I want it to be.
well, and the interesting thing in your hypothetical is it would be much easier to do two things in what you were describing. One would be to just not talk to you anymore because I can't trust you, so I'm just gonna stop. Exactly. And then you come to me with your thing, and I go, you know what? Fuck, if you don't trust me, then fucking I don't want to talk to you. But it's like, okay, but at least I've
That's
done
on you.
what I exactly. I've done what I can do. And the communication aspect of everything that you're describing in our conversation today seems like to me would be the hardest part of everything.
Yeah.
Like when you were describing going and having to talk to that plumbing guy who you thought ran a cable. I was feeling the awkwardness and the humility in my system
Yeah.
of defeat and then yeah, when you're describing this thing where somebody's crossed a boundary with me, if let's say I swing it back to you and I needed to have that conversation where a part of me feels like you're not being fully honest with me, I would probably, rather than having the communication, which is probably best for being the person I'd want to be,
Right.
I instead would just stop talking to Steven.
Yeah. What's the
I can't.
impact of that?
Well, now I miss the connection, the camaraderie. I feel a little absent a little because I'm concluding that this is who he is when it's not. It's just a part of our relationship. But a part of me just tries to go, no, I'm fine. I'm fine. You know what? I'm better off with him not around. The guy was fucking lying all the time. And it's like, yeah, but you're losing the baby with the bathwater, for lack of a better term.
Yeah.
Because you're so many other things other than that one thing that like I say, it could be better resolved because here's the other thing too is unless I communicate to you that it is something that's bothering me, on the other side, you don't know what you did
Yeah.
that
You can't
upset
make
me.
the assumption that other people know what you're thinking and feeling,
Right.
right?
So does he not like the hat I was wearing? Does he not like that I called him at 8 in the morning? And then finally I said, you know what it is, dude? I just think that you've been saying that you've been going to concert a lot, and I know you haven't been going to these concerts.
Yeah.
You know, you pretend like you saw Metallica. You never saw Metallica. And the guy's like, yeah, I did. Listen, stop it. You know, like I like you, dude. You don't need to pretend like you go because I think everybody knows someone who's told those types of lies
Yeah.
or
I've told those
exaggerate,
types of lies,
right?
especially back when I was living the addictive lifestyle. My life was filled with
Oh,
freaking lies.
see, here's the thing to it too, Stephen, is I'm glad I have pictures because I know people like that, and there's a part of me that goes, I'm not lying. Let me show you the picture because I know people like that, and I'm like, but it's
They're all rolling
most.
their eyes. Oh, here we go.
But here's the thing: most people I show it to, they go, you didn't have to show me a picture. I believed you, and I'm
Yeah.
like, okay, good, because I don't have any
But
other
I
proof.
felt like you weren't believing me.
That's the truth. There's a part of me that felt like I needed to prove and validate that
Right.
this story I'm telling. But yeah, so in that,
Which is full circle back to what we were talking about in the beginning of this conversation. Just because we feel something doesn't mean that it's true.
well, hold on to that because something you talk about a lot, and I know you already said this, but I just wanted to be clear. Although an emotion may not be right,
Mm-hmm.
it is totally valid and deserves an appreciation. Some people take that both ways, Steve. Some people go, no, I'm angry right now, so it's okay that I'm punching walls and yelling at you because I'm validating my anger. And then
Yeah,
other
no.
people, okay, yeah, no, let's just try and clarify that and what you mean
So
specifically when you
you're validating the why, not the what.
right.
Right? When you agree with the behavior, you're validating the what. The behavior doesn't line up with who I want to be. I don't want to be punching walls and smashing things and fucking up my relationships because there's a part of me that's expressing anger that way. I can validate why that part of me is angry because it's afraid, because it feels disrespected, because it feels disgusted, because it feels guilty or ashamed. I can validate why that part of me wants to do that, and I can validate that till the cows come home. But I don't want to validate what the part is doing because if I validate what the part is doing, I'm reinforcing the behavior as being right, and that's not cool because it doesn't line up with the life I want to live and the person I want to be.
And I'll give a simple example for myself is I've shared with people there was a part of me that used to get activated and still sometimes does when people won't let me speak. I get,
Mm.
you know, it's like you should listen to me, you should hear me, you should understand me. These demands come in, and there's a bully that comes out that's like, we should just smack this guy right now. He'll fucking listen to us, right? And it's like, will he? Well, no, because sometimes they're twice the size. They smack me back twice as hard.
Yeah,
Other times they listen to me for the moment, but then
yeah,
they never want to hear me again.
yeah.
And also, I feel like shit afterwards because I don't want to
Exactly.
be a violent person.
Yeah, it's not
So,
effective for you to live the life you want to live and be the person you want to be.
so when I'm validating that, I'm validating the emotional response that I'm feeling. I'm not validating the fact that there's a part of me that wants to get violent right now.
Yeah. So you're
That's
validating the why, not the what.
I am. And well, and even that, well, this is where after validating the why, not the what, I work on that why and understand
Exactly.
the actuality. Is that
Yeah.
what's happening?
Yeah,
And
exactly.
do people always have to listen to me? When they don't, does it mean they don't care what I have to say? No, none of those things are true. So working on my own demands is also a part of my process. Not but it is, like you say, working with the emotions as well. Because for
Yeah,
me,
because if you
I
don't validate the why, sorry to interrupt you.
no, no, go
If you
ahead.
don't validate the why, then the part of you that's participating in the what is not open to that education aspect of things, right?
It feels dismissed and unheard.
Exactly, and it just ramps up the emotional response.
You know what, Stephen? I'll give an example I give to people in my groups is I say if a child comes running into my room and they think that there's a monster under their bed, and my response is to say, there's no such thing as monsters, go back to bed. Although it's factually correct, it's totally dismissive of the emotional experience of that child. So what do? We all know we do it. We go, what? There's a monster under your bed. Where's the monster? And we run in the room with the kid and we turn on and we validate the hell out of that kid's experience. And then they see that, they
Yeah,
calm down,
yeah,
and then we go, but listen, I don't think there's such thing as monsters.
yeah,
But we have to validate them first and let them think that we really do appreciate what they're feeling
yeah.
rather than just jumping into logic, reason, pragmatism. But anyways, I think that we're good, Stephen. I think that we did cover everything. I'll just one last story I'll leave you with is a guy when I was saying the thing about people who tell these silly lies. There was a kid I went to school with who told us, I remember, I'll never forget, that he was John Bobbitt's nephew. Okay. Now that's a weird thing to lie about. Okay. And we all called shenanigans on him, but we knew for sure when a couple months later he said he was Captain Kangaroo's grandson. And it was at that moment that I went, but Daryl, Captain Kangaroo's not related to John Bobbitt. And he went, what? And I'm like, well, you said that you're John Bobbitt's nephew, and now you're Captain Kangaroo's grandson. That's not possible. And I
Yeah,
just remember like him dumbfounded. And I'm like, why are you doing it? And he's doing it because he wants to fit in.
yeah.
Is really,
Wants
you
to be
know,
accepted.
and I told him there, and this is when I was 17 years old. I didn't tell him this in front of the group of people. I waited till it was him and I one on one. And I said, buddy, you don't need to do that stuff. And
Yeah,
he still maintained that he wasn't lying.
yeah,
I'll never forget. I'm not lying, Aaron. I'm not lying. I'm like, okay. I just want you to know you don't need to do that. You to hang out with us. We love you,
yeah.
bud. But it is sad when you have those people who feel like they need to self-aggrandize is for the better,
Exactly.
like,
Yeah,
is that
yeah. You're right on the money. Yeah, the self-aggrandizer that's bigging themselves up because they want to be accepted by other people. Usually, it has a tendency of pushing people away, but that's a whole other conversation.